Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Jimmy MacArthur, Director of Business Development at Open Infra Foundation. Jimmy, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Swap. Thank you for the opportunity. Great to be here.
It's my pleasure. And this discussion is going to be of interest to a lot of folks. As we all know, last year, Broadcom acquired VMware. Of course, people have their own apprehensions, but we did not know what cards Broadcom is going to play there. And they did show some of the cards. They made a lot of changes to licenses, fee, a lot of things changed for VMware customers. I have had a lot of play. I have had a lot of discussion with the players in this ecosystem, and they're talking about people are looking at alternatives and they're using VMware. What I want to understand from you is just from Open Infra's perspective or from the perspective of the wider ecosystem, what changes were made, what impact it will have on customers and users, which is triggering this discussion of, hey, we may have to look elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. From our perspective, it's clear that Broadcom's acquisition has shaken the user confidence of their entire market and ecosystem. That's a 45% market share they have in virtualization. And it seems like what they've done is targeted enterprise users specifically, but at the expense of small to medium-sized MSPs. And as a result of this, a lot of folks saw their contracts increase by as much as 500%. And then in addition, companies with really large footprints, especially those with perpetual license, were affected as they got rid of those perpetual licenses. And ironically, they're going directly after the very enterprise customers that they're trying to woo. And then further, they upended an incredibly healthy partner ecosystem. They got rid of almost all of their partners except for a handful of what they call premier partners, forcing all of those smaller MSPs to go to those premier partners to now get their VMware services, and which is costing them their margin. So it's pretty complicated. And then all of that coupled with the fact that you can no longer just buy one-off VMware services, you now have to buy the entire suite of services, which they're calling, I think, the VMware Cloud Foundation. So it's put a pinch on pretty much every range of customer that they have.
I want to also make sure that these are two separate topics. One is that we have seen cases like HashiCorp where they moved away from fully open source OCI approved license to business source kind of license. And the second is where you are changing the terms of licensing or the way you can perpetually use a service. So I want to make that clarity that what kind of licensing changes we are talking about. And then we'll talk about each of them separately. But let's just talk about the license change.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I refer to perpetual licenses, VMware had contracts set up with their customers that allowed them to essentially keep their license in perpetuity. And after that acquisition by Broadcom, they immediately got rid of that. That is, as you said, a completely separate thing from the open source licensing changes that we've seen with like Terraform and OpenSearch and so on.
So far, they have not touched the open source contribution of VMware. In fact, if I'm not wrong, Tanzu has moved from Terraform to OpenTofu as well. So can you talk about, have you seen any worrying development in terms of VMware's commitment to open source?
Well, I think the concern is what you get with any kind of single vendor open source, right? It's sure maybe they're still committed internally to open source, but the reality is they pull all the strings. So in the same way that HashiCorp and OpenSearch and all of these other single vendor open source projects don't really follow true open source ideology, they can pull the rug out from under you at any time.
What are customers thinking, because you, I'm pretty sure, interact with a lot of customers. What are their, fear that, hey, this is something where we may have to look at alternatives?
What I'm hearing in the market from, and I've been fielding calls on this since late last year, with companies trying to figure out how they're going to navigate this. And that's both MSPs and people that are using VMware. There were a lot of cases where for a very long time, folks have been running VMware workloads and also OpenStack workloads and kind of slow playing it to figure out where they're going to go. Now people are speeding that up, and because they're concerned about the future of VMware, either they're being pinched right now, or they happen to renew their contract at the right time, and they're going to have to make this decision in 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road. They're trying to figure out what to do, and open source is the logical conclusion to that, because it provides people a safe place where they know that there's an ecosystem that is healthy and thriving. And I'm talking about OpenStack here, which is a 14-year-old open source project. It's rock solid. And we follow the four opens: open source, open design, open governance, and open development. There aren't any opportunities for us to change the contract or for us to change the terms, because it is pure play open source. And I think that's the thing that people are looking at. They want something that is supported by multiple vendors. They want to be able to move their workloads around, and they don't want to get stuck again. And so that's by and large what I'm hearing day to day.
And how mature is the ecosystem or technologies, tools, product when customers, users are looking at alternatives, when they are looking at OpenStack?
Sure. I mean, OpenStack is a 14-year-old project. I would say it's fully baked at this point, but that's not to say that there's not still development going on. We are seeing, in fact, a resurgence in OpenStack and a very healthy ecosystem. Companies like Rackspace and Mirantis are doubling down on their OpenStack workloads, which is a switch from just a couple of years ago. I think people in the ecosystem see an opportunity here. And again, VMware has a 45% market share. People want to gobble that up, understandably. And I think if you look at OpenStack and you look at the OpenStack marketplace, you'll see dozens of healthy companies running either their own distributions of OpenStack, consulting on OpenStack, storage solutions, backup solutions. It's a full and healthy ecosystem.
When I was talking about the maturity of alternative, I was not talking about the, yes, OpenStack is there for, I mean, you folks, CERN and all those, mega clouds run on it. What I was talking also about is that the maturity of alternative as alternative in place, drop in it. A lot of folks, we are not talking greenfield deployment, but people are considering VMware. So instead of going with VMware, they can go with Mirantis, Rack, and there are a lot of other players. And of course, you folks have a big ecosystem there. I was talking about the folks who are with VMware and they want to migrate. How mature are the solutions for them, and what are the challenges that they have to also consider before they plan their execution of this migration?
That's a great question. And there's no doubt, right? VMware is an incredibly mature product. There's a reason people have been using it. It's easy to use. The UX is easy to use and understandable. And the thing I think that people maybe haven't been looking at for a long time is how OpenStack is kind of meeting that from a feature parity perspective. And I'm not just talking about the UX, but yeah, migration tools as well. There's Coriolis from Cloud-Based Solutions is a half proprietary, half open source solution that currently, and it's been in the works since 2016. So it's a very mature product that allows you to move workloads back and forth from VMware to OpenStack. Additionally, the community is actually working on a pure open source migration tool at the moment that I think will be out and ready to start looking at next week. And there are other solutions in the market right now as well. Companies like HighStacks that are prepared to help people move their workloads over right away.
And how much of this, migration is in stealth mode, that, hey, you have to move, versus companies are actually aggressively going after customers of VMware, hey, come move to alternatives.
We actually took a recent survey from our members, and 80% of them have already received requests to migrate users from VMware to OpenStack, and 60% of our members have already completed a successful migration. We're seeing a lot of movement on that front. But as I said, I think that this thing has a long tail, right? Some organizations have a contract that's going to last for the next few years. They have a massive amount of workloads on VMware, and they're trying to figure out what their next move is and how to do that. On the other hand, we've got companies like a very large insurance company like Geico, who will be putting out more information on this soon, but they have a massive VMware deployment, and they're going to be moving all of those workloads onto OpenStack. They're hiring a team right now. So I think we're seeing all kinds of things. Some enterprise folks are sitting still for the moment. Some are moving right away. And I think the same thing is we're seeing with small to medium businesses. It just kind of depends on the sensitivity of their workloads and also what their contract looks like right now.
Now, can you also talk about, this is a bit of getting into the weeds of things, that when we look at the VMware portfolio, and of course now Broadcom is kind of pushing for bundles, which can be good or bad, depending on how sometimes you want it, but you do want the flexibility. From the perspective of VMware portfolio, which are the ones you are looking at? When I say low-hanging fruits, I'm saying not only those are the easy ones to migrate, but also these are the most prominently used ones.
Yeah, I think if we're talking like feature parity, between OpenStack itself and the marketplace and the ecosystem, OpenStack is there to kind of meet those demands. There's OpenStack VDI, which I think is pretty popular, VDI with VMware users. The dynamic resource scheduling, we've got a tool called Watcher in OpenStack. For failover, there's Masakari. And also, as I mentioned, cloud-based solutions also works for failover and dynamic backup and recovery. We've also got Storeware that works on VMware and OpenStack. I think, and ESX, of course, is just like super popular for networking. In OpenStack, we've got Neutron, and then there's a new silver member of the foundation called Vios that has that kind of more complex networking that ESX currently provides for VMware users. So, I think there's the most kind of popular and most used tools in VMware. We've got feature parity, and in the meantime, as a community, we're working to understand what the gaps are and see how the ecosystem can kind of rise to meet those.
Are there any resources available at OpenInfra to help users in this migration? What are those resources?
We're actually working with a journalist right now on creating a white paper around this, and which we'll be distributing to our members, obviously, but also to the public at large. The one thing that in our user survey, people were asking about was support from the Open Infra Foundation around education and training on how best to migrate. And so that's kind of what we're doing internally. That's our number one mission this year. And I think it will continue to be so in next year and the following years as well.
Do you see that open source is the safest way? And when I say open source, it is open source which is hosted at a neutral organization. It could be Linux Foundation, Apache Foundation, OpenStack Foundation, you name it, so that you do know that nobody is going to pull the strings and leave you high and dry. What lesson do you think not only corporate players, organizations, and even customers will take from this move to not put all their eggs, at least enterprise eggs, in the proprietary basket? Or you feel that no, it will be a mix and match of proprietary and open source, and of course when the things take shape, just like HashiCorp and a lot of other cases happen, the open source will come in and we will find a solution?
the trend that I see, and it's not just, it's not just VMware, it's not just these single vendor software solutions that are the problem, but it's also, data sovereignty is a huge concern for, not just governments, but for companies all over the world. And as we see more and more kind of political turmoil, for lack of a better word, globally, I think people are looking for a solution that is not tied to an individual vendor. They want something that allows them to have complete control over their software, complete control over their data, and I think open source is the only way to address that.
When it comes to open source, when I was listening to you, is that of course a lot of geopolitical conflict is going on there, and without getting into politics, talk about how open source enables, because we are also kind of seeing the rise of techno nationalism, and in some cases it is appropriate also with companies countries. They really don't want suddenly the core technology they are using is under a trade embargo, they can no longer use it, so they do want some kind of sovereignty. Data sovereignty is there, but at the same time they also want to be able to access the technologies, whether you talk about Ukraine, Russia, Israel, or Palestine, or China, Taiwan. So talk about politics aside, because these technologies help ordinary people like you and me. We need to pay bills, use banking. How open source is kind of creating technologies that are not tied to these geopolitical conflicts.
I think open source creates an opportunity for companies to own their own data, to own their own technologies. I mean, like, just look at the OpenStack ecosystem, right? You've got, I don't know, maybe a dozen or more companies that have their own distro of OpenStack. They're finding their own way to make a profit on that, but at the same time, they're relying on and contributing back upstream to the open source project. And those resources that they're contributing upstream to are available to companies anywhere in the world. And so when I look around the world, and I do a lot, I talk to folks all over the place, they're using these technologies to help lift up their local economies. They're using technologies to help keep jobs in their local economies and to train people on new software techniques that, those opportunities aren't available with proprietary software, or at least certainly not in the same way. And it enables countries, I'll give you an example. Algeria I've been talking with a service provider in Algeria. They are running the first OpenStack public cloud. They're the only public cloud provider in Algeria. And they look at it as an opportunity for both their citizens and for their country to remain, I guess, sort of free from proprietary providers like Amazon and Azure.
What advice you have for companies who have invested in VMware infrastructure and they are looking at migrating away, or they are not yet looking at migrating away, that these are the things they should look at and decide whether they are the right candidate for migration, or they're like, no, we are happy with this ecosystem? And if they do decide, what are the steps they should start taking?
The biggest thing is, what does your contract renewal look like today? And then the second question is, what is it going to look like tomorrow? This is the problem with single vendor open source, is it puts you in a headlock, for lack of a better term, and you've got to agree to whatever their terms are if you want to stay on that platform. I think there are challenges. You've got employees that are well versed in VMware, so you're going to have to start looking at retraining those employees to look at other technologies. Whether that's OpenStack or some other thing, I would really highly suggest you go with an open source solution. And it's not that difficult to retrain folks, and it's certainly, in comparison with the cost differences of getting squeezed by a particular company, whether that's HashiCorp or VMware or whomever, retraining some employees so that they're more well versed in more modern open source virtualization solutions, especially cloud native, which is important these days. I'd say it's worth it. It's worth it to take another look. And I would also say, there are plenty of companies in the ecosystem of OpenStack to help guide you towards that. Whether it's a consultant that just helps you, start to move some workloads, or who can help you train your employees. Those resources are all available in the OpenStack community.
Can you also talk about, of course, you folks know Open Infra, you have not just OpenStack, you have a lot of other products also. There's a big ecosystem there. In your roadmap, is there any milestone where you're also kind of targeting VMware workloads that, hey, these are the projects, releases, or developments which are looking at this pain point that people are facing? So it's actually kind of just in addition to just you can just move to OpenStack, but I just want to look at your roadmap, looking at this big problem that the ecosystem is facing today.
Yeah, we actually have put together a VMware working group, VMware migration working group for our member organizations, and we're looking at those exact things. We're trying to figure out what are the pain points for organizations currently on VMware, what are the pain points for people trying to move off of VMware, and then what are the gaps? What are we missing in OpenStack and our other infrastructure projects? Is there anything we can do to help fill those holes and also improve the software along the way? And I would expect the results of that to begin trickling out. We have our second meeting later this week. So it's a slow play, but at the same time, we all recognize the importance and the moment of this in the market, and we're working to get those questions answered as quickly as possible.
Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me today and talk about this whole development, and also most importantly that those customers, those users are not left high and dry on their own. There's a whole very mature ecosystem of not a single vendor, but a lot of vendors, and of course a neutral foundation to help them. Thanks for those great insights, and I look forward to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.